When officers forced open the master bedroom door of the Mercer home in Ravenbrook Heights, Oregon, the sight stopped them cold. On the carpet, 34-year-old Elena Mercer lay face down in a pool of blood, stabbed over a dozen times in an attack. So frenzied it left deep gouges in the floorboards beneath her body. There were no broken windows, no signs of forced entry, no missing valuables. Just silence, the smell of iron in the air, and a husband insisting he had no idea how it had happened. That husband was Graham Mercer, a seemingly devoted father of two, who claimed he had come home late from a work meeting only to find his wife already dead. But something about his story immediately felt wrong. His clothes bore not a single stain, his watch was missing from his wrist, and the timeline he gave officers shifted each time he was pressed for details. At first glance, the Mercer case looked like a home invasion gone wrong. But within days, investigators uncovered a trail of carefully hidden secrets: missing money, a fabricated alibi, and a lie so meticulously rehearsed that it took weeks to unravel. That lie, told by a husband desperate to protect himself, would become the key to exposing a darker reality, one that destroyed not only a marriage but an entire family. This isn't just the story of a brutal murder. It's the story of a single falsehood that spiraled into a chain of destruction, leaving behind a community asking how far one man would go to keep the truth buried. Ravenbrook Heights was the kind of suburb people moved to when they wanted safety, privacy, and comfort. Tucked against the Oregon hillsides, it was lined with identical brick homes, quiet cul-de-sacs, and manicured lawns that rarely hinted at trouble. To the outside world, the Mercers appeared to be the perfect family. Graham Mercer, 36, was a mid-level financial consultant with a reputation for being meticulous and ambitious. He was often described as polite, dependable, and dedicated to providing for his family. His wife, Elena, 34, managed a small home-based business in interior design, admired locally for her creativity and charm. Together, they had two young children, ages 6 and 9, who attended the local elementary school just blocks away. To neighbors, the Mercers looked stable and happy, often seen hosting barbecues, attending school events, and keeping up with community gatherings. But beneath the carefully curated image, small cracks were forming. Friends noted Graham's frequent late nights at work. Others quietly observed tension when the couple appeared in public, subtle enough to ignore, but visible to anyone paying close attention. No one suspected that within months, the family's home, once a picture of suburban calm, would transform into the site of one of Ravenbrook Heights' most disturbing homicide cases. On the night of November 12, 2019, Ravenbrook Heights was silent under a steady drizzle of rain. The Mercer household sat dark from the outside, only a faint glow from the living room lamp visible through partially drawn blinds. At 10:46 p.m., neighbors would later recall hearing a sharp noise, not loud enough to be clearly identified as a gunshot, but unusual in the quiet cul-de-sac. Within minutes, the Mercer home became a crime scene that shocked the entire community. Inside the house, Elena Mercer was found lying face down in the hallway near the staircase. She had sustained a fatal gunshot wound to the chest at close range. Investigators would later confirm that she had no defensive injuries, suggesting she was taken by surprise. Upstairs, the two children were discovered unharmed, both asleep in their bedrooms, unaware of the violence that had erupted just feet away. The initial 911 call was placed by Graham Mercer himself at 10:52 p.m. His voice, calm but urgent, reported that his wife had been shot during a supposed home invasion. He claimed he had returned from a late meeting at his office to find the front door ajar and Elena collapsed inside. According to his statement, he never saw the intruder. Police arrived at 11:03 p.m. Patrol units from the Ravenbrook Police Department, quickly secured the perimeter, and swept the house. No forced entry was identified on the front or back doors. Windows were intact. The interior of the home was undisturbed. No signs of struggle, no overturned furniture, no missing valuables. The supposed burglary that Graham described did not appear consistent with the crime scene. The murder weapon, a Glock 19 pistol, was recovered from the kitchen counter, its slide locked back, a single bullet casing nearby. The firearm was registered under Graham Mercer's name. He explained that he normally kept the gun in a locked drawer in the master bedroom for home defense and suggested the intruder must have retrieved it after breaking in. Officers noted Graham's clothing was dry despite the ongoing rain, a detail that stood out during their preliminary questioning. His shoes carried no mud or water. Detectives later remarked that, for a man claiming to have arrived moments after a violent home invasion, he appeared unusually composed. The children were removed from the home immediately and placed under the temporary care of Graham's sister. Crime scene technicians began photographing the residence, collecting trace evidence, and securing the weapon. The medical examiner arrived shortly after midnight to transport Elena's body for autopsy. By morning, news of the killing spread quickly across Ravenbrook Heights. Local media crews parked outside the cul-de-sac, neighbors gathered at the barricades, and speculation about a mysterious intruder dominated early reports. Yet, behind the scenes, investigators were already beginning to doubt Graham's account. The lack of forced entry, the presence of Graham's registered firearm, and the neat condition of the house raised immediate red flags. Detectives knew this. Case was not shaping up as a random break-in. It looked staged, and if it was staged, the focus would inevitably shift inward, toward the man who had called it in. What began as a report of a tragic home invasion was, within hours, being treated as a potential domestic homicide. The investigation into Elena Mercer's death began immediately. Lead Detective Hannah Rowe, a seasoned investigator with the Ravenbrook Police Department, took charge of the case. Rowe had handled several high-profile homicide cases in the county, and from the first walkthrough of the Mercer home, she suspected that the scene had been manipulated. Crime scene technicians processed the residence with precision. The Glock 19 pistol found on the counter was swabbed for fingerprints and gunshot residue. Ballistics testing confirmed that the round removed from Elena's body had been fired from that weapon. Only Graham Mercer's fingerprints were present on the gun's grip and trigger. There were no foreign prints or smudges that might suggest another person had handled it recently. The autopsy report, completed within 48 hours, revealed key details. Elena had been shot once at close range, the trajectory indicating she had been facing her shooter at the time. Gunpowder residue was found on her clothing, supporting the close-distance conclusion. The medical examiner estimated the time of death between 10:30 and 10:45 p.m., a window that directly contradicted Graham's statement about returning home at 10:50 p.m. Detectives then examined Graham's alibi. He claimed he had been working late at his office downtown until nearly 10:40 p.m. However, when investigators pulled the security footage from his firm's parking garage, they found his vehicle had exited at 9:22 p.m., over an hour earlier than he claimed. There was no evidence he returned to the office afterward. Additional forensic analysis raised more concerns. Luminol testing in the Mercer home revealed faint blood traces in the master bedroom, partially cleaned but still detectable. This suggested that the shooting had not occurred in the hallway, as Graham reported, but inside the bedroom, with the body later moved to its final position. Detectives also examined Graham's phone records. His call logs showed no outgoing calls to business associates after 8 p.m., despite his claim of attending a work-related meeting. Instead, a series of text messages were discovered between Graham and an unknown number, later traced to a prepaid cell phone. These exchanges were short, coded, and frequent in the days leading up to the murder, but no identity could immediately be attached to the number. Neighbors added to the growing list of contradictions. 2 residents reported seeing Graham's vehicle parked in the driveway at approximately 9:45 p.m., again inconsistent with his alibi. Another witness stated they heard what sounded like a single loud bang around 10:40 p.m., followed by silence. By the third day of the investigation, suspicion had shifted heavily toward Graham Mercer. Detectives Rowe and her team continued compiling evidence to strengthen probable cause. They subpoenaed his financial records and uncovered mounting debt, nearly $75,000 spread across credit cards, personal loans, and business-related expenses. Insurance investigators later confirmed that Graham had taken out a new life insurance policy on Elena just 6 months earlier, valued at $500,000. The final blow came when gunshot residue testing was performed on Graham's hands and clothing from the night of the murder. Both came back positive, strongly suggesting he had fired the weapon. With these findings, the theory of a random home invasion had collapsed completely. The evidence pointed inward. This was not the work of an intruder. The murder had all the hallmarks of being deliberate, staged, and carried out from within the home. Detectives formally brought Graham Mercer in for questioning. Though he maintained his story of an intruder, his timeline and explanations were now contradicted by hard forensic evidence and surveillance records. Investigators noted his composure throughout the interrogation, but his inability to explain the discrepancies only deepened their certainty. What remained unclear, however, was the motive. While the financial strain and life insurance policy pointed to one possibility, detectives believed there was more to uncover. The mysterious prepaid cell phone and the hidden texts hinted at a deeper, more personal layer of deception. It would take weeks of investigative work before the true scope of Graham's secret life and the real reason behind Elena's murder came to light. As detectives continued to dig into Graham Mercer's life, the initial narrative of a financially desperate husband seeking an insurance payout seemed too straightforward. Detective Hannah Rowe was convinced that a larger, hidden truth was buried in the layers of his story. That truth came into focus when the team finally traced the prepaid cell phone. Through cell tower pings and purchase records, investigators learned that the phone had been bought in a convenience store in a neighboring county. Security footage showed Graham himself at the counter, purchasing the device in cash. This discovery erased any doubt that the mysterious number belonged to him. But the question was, who was on the other end of those cryptic messages? When investigators subpoenaed carrier records, the answer delivered a stunning revelation. The other number belonged to a woman named Clara Redmond, a 32-year-old resident of Ravenbrook. Clara was not a random acquaintance. She had once lived 2 streets away from the Mercers and had a complicated history with the Mercer family. Clara's older brother, Douglas, had been involved in a violent altercation with Graham's father more than 2 decades earlier, a feud that ended with Douglas in prison and left bitter resentment between the families. Detective Rowe uncovered that Clara and Graham had reconnected months before Elena's death. Bank statements revealed hotel charges under Graham's name, aligning with weekends when Clara's phone was active near his. Surveillance footage from one hotel captured the two arriving together. What had started as a hidden affair had reignited the long-dormant feud between the Mercers and the Redmonds, though Graham had kept it buried under layers of lies. The investigation took an even darker turn when forensic analysts examined Elena's laptop. In her email drafts folder, they found an unsent message addressed to her sister. The draft described suspicions that Graham was having an affair and included references to unusual financial activity she had discovered in their shared accounts. Elena had been preparing to confront him and possibly expose his secrets, but she never had the chance to send that message. As detectives pieced together the puzzle, they realized that Graham's motive extended beyond money. If Elena exposed his affair and the revived connection to the Redmond family, his professional reputation would collapse. His firm had recently secured a government contract that required clean personal conduct, and any scandal would destroy his career. But the affair was only one part of the revelation. Detectives soon discovered Clara herself was not simply a bystander in the background. A search warrant executed at her apartment revealed handwritten notes, timelines, and references to Elena. Among them was a chilling draft of a letter addressed to Graham, urging him to end this once and for all. Further investigation revealed that Clara's brother Douglas, now released from prison, had been in frequent contact with her. Cell records placed Douglas near the Mercer home on multiple occasions in the weeks before Elena's death. While he was not directly present on the night of the murder, his involvement in planning or encouraging the act became a leading theory for detectives. The investigators now faced a far more complicated picture. Elena's murder was not simply about financial gain. It was the result of a husband entangled in a dangerous affair, dragged back into a decades-old family feud, and cornered by his own lies. Detective Rowe presented this evidence to the prosecution. The case against Graham was overwhelming, but the introduction of Clara Redmond and the possibility of her involvement introduced a second potential defendant. Prosecutors prepared charges against both Graham and Clara, alleging that their affair and coordination directly led to Elena Mercer's death. The community of Ravenbrook, once shocked by what seemed like a tragic case of domestic violence, was now riveted by the idea of a hidden feud resurfacing after decades to destroy a family. The Mercer name, once respected in local business circles, was now synonymous with scandal, betrayal, and bloodshed. The trial that followed would expose every secret, every lie, and every betrayal. What had started as a husband's fabricated story of a home invasion had unraveled into a conspiracy rooted in lust, revenge, and a family history that refused to stay buried. The trial of Graham Mercer opened in the Ravenbrook County Courthouse on a brisk morning in early October. By then, the town had already been consumed by months of speculation, and the courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, true crime, bloggers, and curious onlookers eager to witness the downfall of a man who once carried himself as one of Ravenbrook's most respected professionals. The prosecution laid out its case methodically. Prosecutor Dana Caldwell began by dismantling Graham's original claim of a home invasion. She displayed photographs of the Mercer residence, emphasizing the absence of forced entry and the forensic evidence pointing to a staged scene. Jurors saw images of blood spatter patterns inconsistent with Graham's story and heard testimony from forensic experts who concluded that Elena's injuries suggested an attack by someone she trusted. The centerpiece of the prosecution's case was the prepaid phone. Call records, surveillance footage, and store receipts placed the device firmly in Graham's hands. Caldwell read aloud several text exchanges between Graham and Clara Redmond, referencing plans that coincided with Elena's death. Though the messages were not explicit instructions, their timing and vagueness painted a sinister picture when combined with the other evidence. Witnesses testified to Graham's financial troubles, including the life insurance policy that prosecutors alleged served as his motive. A financial analyst walked the jury through months of overdrafts, mounting debts, and looming contract penalties that would have destroyed Graham's business had Elena lived long enough to expose the irregularities. When it was Clara's turn to face trial, her case was severed but ran back-to-back with Graham's. The prosecution argued that she was more than just a mistress. She was a willing co-conspirator who urged Graham to end it before Elena exposed them. Jurors saw the notes discovered in Clara's apartment, with references to Elena, and timelines leading up to the murder. The defense attempted to cast doubt on the prosecution's case. Graham's attorney argued that while he had engaged in an affair, there was no direct evidence tying him to the murder weapon or placing him at the scene of Elena's death at the moment she was killed. The defense suggested that Clara, motivated by her own family's grudge, might have acted independently. For Clara's part, her attorney claimed that the notes found in her apartment were the ramblings of an emotional woman caught in a bad relationship, not concrete evidence of conspiracy. Despite these defenses, the evidence mounted heavily against both defendants. Forensic testimony established that Elena had been struck in the head by a blunt object found in the Mercer garage, a hammer that bore traces of her blood. Graham's fingerprints were on the handle. though the defense argued that it was his. Hammer in his home, and fingerprints were inevitable. Jurors could not overlook the timing and the clear link to the murder. In closing arguments, Prosecutor Caldwell delivered a concise, forceful summary. She described Graham as a man who built his life on lies. Lies about his finances, lies about his fidelity, and lies about his wife's final moments. She described Clara as someone who fueled those lies, resurrecting a family feud that had been dormant for decades. Together, they had orchestrated the death of an innocent woman whose only crime was discovering the truth. The jury deliberated for less than 2 days before returning its verdict. Graham Mercer was found guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and insurance fraud. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Clara Redmond's trial ended with a slightly different outcome. Though she was acquitted of direct involvement in the murder, she was found guilty of conspiracy and obstruction of justice. The judge sentenced her to 25 years in state prison. The courtroom atmosphere was tense as the sentences were read. Members of Elena's family, who had attended every hearing, expressed relief that justice had been served, though their grief remained visible. The Mercer family name, once respected in Ravenbrook, was now permanently tainted. For the community, the trials represented not only the conclusion of a shocking crime, but also a reminder of how deeply buried resentments and personal betrayals could erupt into tragedy. Ravenbrook, a town that once prided itself on quiet streets and close-knit families, had become synonymous with one of the most notorious cases in county history. The case of Graham Mercer and Clara Redmond ended not with whispered rumors or quiet suspicions, but with the weight of a judge's gavel. Graham's lie, a fabricated story of a home invasion, had unraveled piece by piece until the truth was undeniable. His attempt to mask greed, betrayal, and decades-old grudges with a single falsehood ultimately destroyed not only his own life, but his family's legacy. Elena Mercer, a woman who had stood at the center of her family's stability, became the casualty of deception layered too deep to escape. Her death was the final spark in a feud that stretched back generations, dragging hidden resentments into the open and leaving a trail of devastation across Ravenbrook. The town itself would never be the same. Neighbors who once greeted one another with trust now looked with suspicion, wondering what secrets lingered behind closed doors. The Mercer case became a permanent entry in the county's crime archives, studied by investigators as a cautionary tale of how ambition and dishonesty, when paired with old grudges, could explode into violence. In the end, one man's lie grew into a conspiracy that shattered lives, destroyed reputations, and rewrote a family's history. And it leaves one unavoidable question for anyone who hears it. If one lie can destroy an entire family, how many secrets are still buried in plain sight waiting to surface?